Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. Thank you again, and as always, for choosing to spend your time with us today. I recently had the chance to sit down and spend time with Tim Webster. Tim has a wide variety of experiences in the food and agricultural space. He's been a chief operating officer, a chief executive, a board director, an investor, and he's now the chairman and CEO of Farmer Direct Foods, which is something we dug into deeply in our conversation. Tim shared with me his perspectives about how Farmer Direct Foods is breaking through the noise of a competitive category, how that process works, what you need to know, what they're learning along the way. He shared with me the important lesson that great millers don't make great marketers, which really highlights the need for both technical execution chops along with that marketing horsepower to help commercialize a CPG product at scale. He talked about how this might show up in things like packaging, where you tell better stories with better packaging. We also talked about Tim's experience helping lead the transition of boards, not just board membership and composition, but helping boards shift and evolve their roles and their objectives to meet the changing needs of the organization. And Tim also talked a lot about the need and the importance of maintaining healthy and productive tension among and between your leadership team and your board of directors. It was a great conversation. I'm really excited to have him on the pod. And so now let's jump over to my conversation with Tim Webster, Chairman and CEO of Farmer Direct Foods. Tim, really great to have you on today. Thank you for joining the Pacesetter Pod.
Thank you, Joe. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great. You know, you've done some other programs. I've had a chance to learn a little bit about the background of Farmer Direct Foods. It's a good chance for us to dig a little bit deeper and learn more about you. And so before we get into some of the topics we want to talk about today, maybe give us the 101 on Farmer Direct Foods. Who is it? Who do you serve? Products and services offered? Your spot in the value chain. Kind of give us the breakdown.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that. So our investor group acquired Farmer Direct Foods, Inc. in March of 2022. So prior to the date that we acquired the company, Farmer Direct Foods was formed as a co-op of Kansas wheat farmers in south, central, and western Kansas. Their mission was to bring white whole wheat, which is a variety that they had developed in concert with Kansas State University and other agronomists and consultants in the area. And it was their view the perfect grain. They believed it was going to replace Wonder Bread as a conventionally milled wheat bread with something that could be eaten as a whole grain. So the white whole wheat that we grow out there has a natural sweetness. So unlike some whole wheat that historically people would have thought of as going to be darker in color, coarser in texture, more bitter, higher ash content, they believed that this white whole wheat was going to change the world, and everyone would stop using derivative flour, which has been milled down, taking all the nutritional value off the kernel, and then having to add nutrients back into it, which in World War II, the government said to the flour millers, this product is what we're feeding most of the people now, and it has no nutritional value. So these growers were like, we've done it. We've cracked the code, and now everyone's going to eat white whole wheat, whole grain, and it's going to be just like the Wonder Bread that they love. So they formed a marketing cooperative to just get that word out. So 15 years later, they had limited success, and they decided that the key would be to vertically integrate. And so they bought the Roberts Seed Company in Salina, Kansas, just outside Salina, and converted it into a flour mill using the old-fashioned, now lost technique of true stone ground flour milling. So picture the mill by the river with the paddle wheel and big stones just gently massaging the wheat, trying to do as little damage to the starch as possible. So for 15 years, they did that. And they had a couple of big breakthroughs. They became a supplier to King Arthur Baking Company, Tortilla King down the road in Mount Ridge, Kansas, which is now a really booming, incredible success story. but they really hadn't cracked the major market areas, not in grocery, not in the large bakeries. So we acquired Farmer Direct in March of 2022 and built a sales and marketing infrastructure that includes myself and my colleagues, Haley Eckert and Ben Mantooth and others, Blake Woolman, to bring sophisticated, we at least hope we're sophisticated, consumer product expertise to this very noble quest that the farmers started 30 years ago. And so in the last 24 months, we've launched Farmer Direct Foods as a national brand, both on the retail side. As of this week, you can find us in all the Sprout stores nationwide as sort of our hallmark flagship retail placement, and also in bakeries and tortilla manufacturers and both the big bread bakers as well as the retail bakeries. So here in Kansas City, the McLean's and the Wheatfields over in Lawrence, those are the types of customers that are using our flour. So we kept all the basic elements of what FDF was, a really strong grower network, an amazing stone ground flour mill, and some of these existing OEM contracts. And now we're building a national brand, both in retail and institutional, on those three pillars.
So origination, footprint, asset footprint, manufacturing processes all stayed the same. It's an investment in those with a thesis around a different go-to-market, some commercialization rigor, a sales organization. I think it's a really interesting story. And we're going to get into it in a minute here about, what does that experience been
look like
here?
Yeah, the products are delicious because we bring them direct from the farm and they're not commingled in a local elevator where everything gets blended together to kind of the lowest common saleable product quality typically. Our stuff comes direct from the grower. So within a truckload, you're not going to see 25 or 50 different farms blended together. It's all coming from John Griffith. So uniformity of cereal chemistry, uniformity of kernel size and makeup. So our products are going to be batch to batch, much more consistent than the competitive products. So delicious, consistent, traceable, so you can know exactly where your product came from, and sustainable. And we'll double click on that in a minute. Everything that we do is regenerative agriculture. And that's a growing trend. Some of your listeners will already know what that means, but it basically means a different way of farming, actually farming reinvented in a way instead of just taking the goodness from the soil each crop year, and instead building soil health over time. And there are specific things we do and that one does to be regenerative. So instead of, again, in the old days, it was the Dust Bowl in Kansas. Farmers were just raping the soil. The big storm comes, 20 years of topsoil gets blown away, and it takes decades to rebuild. This has taken hold now, and we're farming in a way that is actually building soil health, measured by things like organic matter in the soil. And there are actually organic tests that can validate that we're improving soil health. It also leaves us with a negative carbon footprint because we don't till the soil is one of the headlines. When you ask me, what does it really mean? What are you really doing? We're not tilling. So we're not releasing carbon in the atmosphere. We're keeping the carbon in the soil. We're also not irrigating. So instead of taking water out of the aquifer, we're doing dry farming. So every 5-pound bag of Farmer Direct flour saves 650 gallons of water relative to conventional irrigated agriculture, which particularly in California, where we're having tremendous success on the retail side, where water scarcity is top of mind, it's a really, important and exciting aspect of what makes us different.
Absolutely. And certainly originating in that South Central, West Central Kansas region, you have to be pretty attuned to dry farming, given weather patterns and some of the recent past for sure.
And it is one of those cool things where it's just the right seed in the right region with the right, the soil environment as well as the climate is perfect for this variety that they developed. And so It allows us. So these guys have been regenerative from day one. Right now, you go out, everybody's talking about being regenerative by 2030 or 2050. And we like to say, we've never been any other way.
Yeah. So it strikes me as you have not just a dual challenger, but two that I want to zoom in on. So you're with this uniformity approach, almost a decommoditization with the hypersegregation and identity protection, nothing being commingled. Conventional food systems, our ag supply chain systems, it's all built on commingling, on aggregating, on driving efficiency through volume, which requires us to commingle and do all the things that are opposite of what you're talking about. So you've got the working operationally in a mode that is radically different than the conventional approach. At the same time, and you've done this before, but you're also trying to build and scale a food business despite the differentiations you just talked about, what is a pretty congested and hyper-competitive marketplace. And so I think it'd be interesting to hear from you, Tim, how you all have taken that upon yourselves to, one, go out there into the market where differentiation and branding and telling your story can be challenging with all the competing noise. Not because you don't have a good story, but just there's a lot of people talking. But then simultaneously, what's happening within your four walls is so radically different than the way that the value chains are structured. What has that process been like, and what are you learning?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Joe. My mind's racing a little bit. So first off, in terms of breaking through, and in marketing, you'll often hear the concept of awareness, trial, repeat. So at its simplest level, we're trying to create awareness about what we're doing and get people to try the product. So awareness and trial are very top of our marketing funnel and marketing focus and prioritization. But our conviction is if we can just get people to try it, the product's going to do the work to bring them back. Because repeat is often super challenging. As I say to my team all the time, you don't win the battle when you get on shelf. That's when the war begins. So there's the pre-war and then there's the real war. The pre-war is getting on shelf. The real war is winning and staying there. And you made a couple really important points. It's a humongous category that's got very mature, giant companies and brands in it. But people like King Arthur and Bob's Red Mill and other specialty players have shown that the consumer has moved into an area where they are receptive to the idea of premium. They're receptive to the idea of alternatives. So maybe the conventional flour category, gold medal 30 years ago, is quite different because we've built a top of the pyramid consumer awareness that many of the things that you touched on, that there is a better way and not all flour is the same and it's not all coming from the same place. It's not all milled the same way. So there have been some great innovators in the space that have paved the way for consumers to be more open-minded. It's not just grandma used gold medal, mom used gold medal. By golly, gold medal is good enough for me. There is that, and I think that goes to other categories that I'm passionate about. I'll talk about enthusiast categories where, like in wine, do we need as many different wines as there are in the wine store? Definitely not. But enthusiasts are craving that, the story, the discovery, the treasure hunt. So this is an enthusiast category. Artisan baking, home baking is a passion for people. It's one of the beautiful things that came out of COVID is that families started baking again and they were home together. And that has stuck, Joe, interestingly. This category has been booming for 3 years. So it wasn't just it was a reintroduction, it was a reawakening, a reboot, if you will, of home baking. And it's stuck. So people are like, this is great. This bread's awesome. This is fun. The kids have enjoyed doing this. So that has been a blessing, obviously, for all of us in this space. So that's kind of my quick pass at how are we trying to crack through. We spent a lot of time on packaging design because, think about the bakers going to the flour section. They're going 20 miles an hour in their cart. They've got 2 kids in the cart. They're not going to stop and say, is there anything new here? What might I be finding today that wasn't here last week? So we really worked hard to try to create a package design that once they come to the section, they reach for what they're used to buying, and out of their corner of their eye, they see our little green truck, which we spent a lot of time on. What is the iconic imagery that we want to use that would cause the package number one to stand out on the shelf and then jump in the basket, right? That's what we tried to train it to do. We haven't gotten that down yet. But the little green truck was intended to evoke a trip to the farmer's market. So you look at that little green truck, and we had picked it before we then went and said, what are farmers markets using as their marketing imagery? And most of them are using trucks like this because that's what you see the farmers pull up to the farmer's market in. And so Farmer Direct is like a trip to the farmer's market, but we did it for you. You don't have to drive to John Griffith's farm to get yourself a bushel basket of this white whole wheat. We're bringing it to you at the grocery store. And so that was the imagery of like, what can we do on the pack? Because if you also look in the section, and I'm not going to name names of my competitors, but if you look at some of the packages, they're so incredibly busy. There's 6 or 7 different things they're trying to convey to you, which makes that space very crowded. You'll notice our package is not crowded. The top half of the bag is primarily the little green truck and a statement of thank you for supporting Americans' regenerative farmers. And that's the top half of our bag. The bottom half gets into the type of product and suggested usages and weight and measures and all the rest of that. But we really tried to create the top half of that package to be a white billboard with that little green truck. So now all somebody has to do is be told, because that's sometimes the story of who gets sent to the grocery store, go get me some flour with the little green truck on it. That's the kind of thing we were shooting for. Well, so long answer there about how do you crack through and it's not just flour consumers, right? There's all the messaging, all the different channels. So how do you create that hook? We're doing some interesting work with influencers. We have our big swing at the fence, putting this on blast. One of our biggest growers at the annual meeting, we were doing a ribbon cutting. We just invested a couple $1 million in the facility that we completed in March of 2024. And Big Dean, one of my growers, says, Tim, do you know what Taylor Swift does before every Chiefs game? I said, Dean, you're embarrassing me here. I'm a big Chiefs fan. I should know this. And he says, she bakes Travis cinnamon rolls from scratch. Why is she not using Farmer Direct flour? And how have you failed to get that product in her hands? So I have used a whole bunch of guerrilla tactics to get this stuff. And then Mama Kelsey, for crying out loud, is baking chocolate chip cookies that are being sold at Arrowhead Stadium and Lincoln Financial last year when Jason was still playing for the Eagles. So we're chasing Mama Kelsey too, to make them aware of our story and all the interconnections we have with the Chiefs. I'm a 40-year season ticket holder. And so anyhow, that's the big swing that we're making that would obviously create dramatic increase in awareness overnight.
Well, I think one of the things that's important and instructive there too is, great millers may not make great marketers. And so if we go back to the start of the story, nothing fundamentally wrong with origination strategy, nothing wrong with the production approach, nothing wrong with the finished product, but it's that not necessarily last mile challenge, but it's getting it on the shelf, getting it in the cart, getting it in their stomachs. And so, I don't remember the stats here, but read something recently around RX bars, which is one of the very, very popular protein bars, not meal replacement necessarily, but a healthy snack. And the original packaging next to, in sort of a meme form, the original packaging next to the sales, volume and revenue, and store distribution. And then a radical revisiting of the label, which now, if you pick up an RX bar, it's not an endorsement, but it's pretty simple. It says like 3 egg whites,
5 ingredients,
It's like 5
Right.
ingredients and they're listed.
Clean
And-
label.
And it's
Yep.
basically buying whatever it was about that, buying the ingredient list really triggered something for the consumer. And so I do think it's an important thing for other folks that are out there that maybe have conventionally been in an ag supply, ag value chain space upstream that are now looking to extend into CPG or consumer facing products, really understanding that this is an art and a science, and having folks that have the reps is a really important thing to do. And you don't want to underinvest in the way that you present and bring this thing to market, because you will likely get results that reflect that underinvestment.
That's a great point. And I've spent a ton of time in my career on package design. And it is, as many things are described, if it becomes a committee where everybody gets to put one thing on the front of the package, you can really dilute it. And then obviously we're huge believers in research and making sure you're not just listening to your own sales pitch in convincing yourself about why you're doing something. So we are very externally oriented in terms of how we do things. So back to your first part of that question was like the operating complexity and scaling challenges. And I'll just do one dimension of that we've been spending a ton of time on. So our business is, knock wood, going to basically double in size in 2024. And we have big, audacious goals for 2025. And recalling what I said about how we do it, where we're buying it direct from the grower, several tensions in that. Number one, we build a forecast by customer, by item, so we know how much of John's white whole wheat we need in the month of September, and then we go contract with him for that. And so, as you well know, everyone here knows, forecasts don't always manifest with orders in exactly the same volume and time that they were predicted. And then our whole idea is we've got 50 new business initiatives underway simultaneously. And I can't tell you which of those we're going to win and which of those we're going to lose. And if we win, when they're going to start, and are they going to flip the switch and give us all the volume day one, or are they going to ramp us in from 20% to 40% to 70%? So we build a baseline demand plan of the customers that we are doing business with today that give us good, best efforts, good faith forecasts. And we build that. And then we layer in what I call our opportunity set. And we build that also by customer, by item, by month. So our growers, there's intervals here. So this is all built around basically a July to June harvest year. And so July they harvest and they look at us and say, how much of us do you want? And we're paying a premium of like $1.50 a bushel to get first call. But that first call doesn't include them holding it in the bins for the year to see if this new business is going to come. So out of some creativity, we've convinced them that the $1.50 premium is worth working with us. And so what we'll say is, like to you as a grower, Joe, we'll say, we'll buy 10,000 bushels on this schedule, but we'd like an option to come back for another 5. And there's a couple of data points where they say, okay, I'll give you that till October, but then I got my beans coming in. So that's another important marker where they're going to say, are you going to take it or not? And so we go through this whole flux capacitor again of running the model of who's been converted from an opportunity to a customer. How does their ramp look? All of that. So for a small business, we are very intensive in the granular, what do you call that? Bottoms up, zero-based budgeting. We're doing that over and over again because we have to do the best job possible to know exactly what type we need, how much we need, and when we need it. So you put your finger on it. If we were just buying at the elevator, none of that exists. Mm-hmm. If we just call up and say, hey, Schooler XYZ elevator company, we need some red whole wheat next week, that's 11 protein. We could do it that way, and that's everybody else does it that way. We're not doing it that way. where, as I've just described it, that's one of the real places that we have some really smart people with really strong understandings of the markets and our growers. And we have incredible growers who spent 30 years trying to build this and handed the baton to us. We handed them a few $1 million in cash. They handed us the baton, but they're cheering us on because they have long-term agreements, they have profit sharing, and they're still in it.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
Well, and as your business grows, that then in turn de-risks their production and from a demand standpoint, because
Correct.
Over time, the likely scenario becomes your raw material demands are more steady throughout the year, more known, more predictable, and perhaps would even outstrip the productive capacity of your existing grower set. So the risk would shift to you, whereas they may carry the risk right now of overproducing relative to the premium demand for the product. Eventually, you'll need to grow that base of producers.
That's for sure. And very intuitive. And so there are things, the way this will unfold. And just one last part of that you touched on, which was really intuitive. It's sort of an asymmetrical commitment because, as you know, agriculture is year to year a roller coaster ride. So we say to the grower, or the grower says to us, I'm willing to commit this many acres and I'm targeting 10,000 bushels of white whole wheat at 13.5 protein with this falling number, all the other specifications. They may not grow a bushel of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to have 200 pounds of grower commitments to get 100 pounds of what we need. Okay, so there is this asymmetrical nature of the commitment that is just the nature of agriculture. And then we have a mechanism where, let's just say everybody had a boomer crop and the 100 that we're looking for, our growers have 400. So we have a pro rata mechanism where the demand gets allocated to them based on the commitment that they made. So we don't just cherry pick and say, hey, Joe's closer by here. It'd be a little cheaper if we bought it all from him because it's the freight's only 10 cents instead of 70 cents. So we have an equity system to acknowledge the asymmetrical nature of this premise. And then we're shooting for 13 or 14 protein. We're a high protein shop, high gluten, higher quality. You have 16, I have 13. So we will buy from you and buy from me and bring those into the elevator and we will blend, but I can tell you that it's 66% Joe, 33% Tim. So I still have traceability, but it acknowledges the fact that that it just doesn't always come out of the ground as we were looking for it, so to speak.
Yeah. Which is an easy story to tell within the four walls of our industry, but you go outside of it and people start to scratch their heads.
Eyes glaze over.
But I think that's an interesting model to, I don't want to say evenly, but equitably distribute the demand in those bumper crop years. I mean, you can certainly default to the best quality at the best location, but that's going to mean you're probably measuring success year by year, and every year you're going to be restarting and rebuilding relationships.
And that guy in Western Kansas is going to drop off eventually because he just only gets to eat at the trough once every 5 years, and that's just that's not equitable.
Yeah. He doesn't want to beg for his neighbors to have a crop failure.
Right, exactly. So we incur some incremental cost to invest in the health of the network.
So something you said here, and I want to transition us to another topic. You had talked about how the farmers, of course, have been producing this white whole wheat, delivering it to the legacy organization, feeding the machine in the hopes of commercial success, which came in fits and starts, but maybe not at the scale they expected. And that reminded me of the fact that you really have a story of transitioning governance here, right? And so moving from an agricultural cooperative model to a privately held by an investor group, which is also different than simply a family owning it, right? So that's not a common transition, at least that I'm aware of. Maybe it's very common, it happens all the time. I've not heard of that very often. So maybe walk us through how that process went. I mean, clearly there was a pre-existing need because the business wasn't achieving its objectives. But walk us through how that process went to help sell that idea and sell the reality of what that's going to look like. And along the way, Tim, what approaches you found helpful or what lessons you learned along the way? Because I think the reason I bring this up is, the process of moving not just a business's focus or a business's product, offering, or maybe in a business's structure. I mean, these are all big changes that are tough. But when you're putting pressure on the underlying governance of the organization, really anything can happen. And so I'm very curious to know what your experience has been there.
Well, I loved your conversation with Tom Olive about governance recently, and it did get me thinking about this topic. So a farmer co-op is a structure acknowledged for governmental purposes, tax purposes, and I don't know that there's a codified set of best practices for co-op management, but you do find, particularly in these agricultural regions, there's hundreds of co-ops around, and so there's a expert co-op lawyer, there's an expert co-op bank, and many of them, right? So there is an infrastructure system that's been built around the fact that these co-ops, which were formed for individual growers to put their life together, put their interests together, and aggregate it so we can own an elevator together because I, as a single grower, can't afford to do that. So, and then we're going to go buy, we're going to buy our inputs cheaper by aggregating. So all kinds of logic around why co-ops exist and how they started to then be managed, but it's generally sort of a democracy, if you will, a collective, better word, that then has a governance, which is typically going to be a board, which is a subset of the growers who are elected from time to time, dispersed over the geography. So you have typically many growers. I believe there were 50 or 60 in the predecessor Farmer Direct Foods Inc. And they had a board that was responsible for looking after this business. And these guys are smart as a whip and they run great businesses, but a milling business wasn't their primary area of focus nor expertise. So they all always, I think, felt a little bit uncomfortable with, do they know the things they needed to know to hold the manager to account in the flour milling business in terms of projections and growth rates and margins and all those kinds of things.
And what is a reasonable capital outlay?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think and most of those things where people go from something they do all day to something they don't do, it takes longer, it's harder, it takes more capital, and it can be a fairly thankless job to step into that role. And I think the board, I was going to call it our board, but the board that I dealt with in acquiring the company and now the growers that I work with, tremendous admiration for how they went about their business. So as a segue to the question of governance, one of the coolest things was John Griffith was the chairman of the board that we were negotiating this transaction with. And half of our negotiations, he was in the cockpit of his combine on a Zoom call. Just so as I'm looking at you on the camera here, I was talking to him while he was out there farming because he didn't have time to stop to try to do this transaction with me. So moving from that, the main transition was keeping the growers intact. We viewed the grower network as very central to the value proposition and what we were acquiring. So we really nurtured those relationships with these long-term contracts, profit sharing, and they were very creative and helpful in helping make sure that we had the right capital structure to get this new part of the venture up and out, which building a national brand from scratch, we could do another podcast on that, is no small undertaking. So our group consists of 13 investors. Most of them I know through the Kansas City Young Presidents Organization. So a long time ago, I was a young president in Kansas City. And they're people that I've done life with, and we invest together by choice. These folks have had amazing careers. They have all kinds of alternative ways to invest their capital. but they choose to do it in this partnership because we have fun and we've done some good deals together. And they prefer to be involved in operating businesses where they can pick up the phone and talk to the CEO, find out what's going on, as opposed to giving it to a newly minted investment fund that's going to charge them 2% and 20% of the gains and keep you in the dark in terms of what's going on. They also know that who they are is a source of great value to me as an operator of this business because of their network. Dave Lockton Insurance is one of our largest individual investors. He knows everybody. And that subject of risk management, how are we going to protect our interests from an insurance point of view? We've got the guy in the room in our cap table, and his network is unbelievable of people. Hey, Dave, I need to know somebody in this area that does this. So this collective, there's a lot of benefits in investing, but for me, a great sense of responsibility because these are my friends and I have a duty to them. So went down that path to say, these are all really close friends of mine. We've done a lot of business together and we have ground rules. So it's not just fun money. They take this investment as seriously as they do anything else, but they love being involved in it because they can call and say, how's it going? How is the crop? How are things going at Sprouts? There's just a connectivity issue. But to your point, they appointed a board. There are 4 of us of the 13 that are the board, and we report out to the investors on a quarterly basis. And those 3 guys that come in the room, and we're very collaborative. Our management team sits in for the vast majority of the meetings, and then we do an executive session. But when those guys walk in the room, they take off their Buddy a Tim hat and they put on their fiduciary hat, and they're not afraid to hold my feet to the fire. And they are also, as the designees of this 13, they bump into these people in social settings, and people say, how's it going at FDF? And so they want to be in a position to answer that positively, hopefully, but with the right amount of information and diligence and skepticism that they fulfill their obligations. So I feel like they may even feel a heightened sense because it's such a small group relative to the broader partnership that they really push me to make sure they know exactly where we're going and what the outlook is, and that they're doing their job as directors, but also that they're able to be conduits to the broader investor group, because this is a fast-moving train, and it is hard to keep up with us if you're not talking to me on a, at least a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So that's a long answer.
No, it's a good answer, Tim, and I think there's a lot of things we can pull on there. One of the things that I had speculated is in the transition from a farmer-led board, we do a bit of work with ag co-ops, and they do have their unique governance approach. And I think they have some of the smartest board members in the industry. And those individuals also struggle to take off the farmer hat and put on the co-op board member hat, because it's sometimes it's too interrelated, but wildly different types of roles. And so what I was curious is if there was actually tension, but it sounds like it was a full transition from a previous farmer board, full divestiture of those original owners to this new investor group. And so really what you have then is, what I'm hearing is frankly the advantage, not just of, I say advantage, probably depends on the day if you're the operator, but the advantage of board members who are highly personally invested. It's not someone hanging fiduciary obligations over their head and threatening to take away their $100,000 board salary. It's actually their capital at play, which keeps them intimately involved. But I was wondering what that transition had been like, and it sounds like it was relatively smooth.
Well, and we had done things before. So we had done deals before. So it wasn't a first time for this group to put a governance structure. It wasn't the same board members last time in the last company we sold, because we select them based on the specific entity and who's got the bandwidth and those kinds of things. There was a complexity that we thought a lot about, and that one day may be a part of this journey, was initially the growers were quite interested in staying involved in an ownership role as opposed to just long-term grower agreements and profit sharing. And I just was very straightforward with them that I don't know how long this is going to take, and I don't know how much it's going to cost. And I just met you. My partners here understand that. And if we do have to continue to call capital or disappoint in terms of how long it's taking or what's happening, I don't want to be in a new partnership where the beta, I don't even want to say risk, but it is, of course, it's risk, but just the volatility of how this thing's going to play out as we go from what the company has been to what we hope to build it into.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this, I don't know what this is going to be like. And I don't want you in that situation or us in that situation and adding that complexity. Now, down the road, if we get this thing to a point where I think it's going to be, and they wanted to flip we have a note with them. They wanted to flip that into equity. Once we get to up and out and to more predictability, I'd love to have them in it.
Yeah.
And participate in the value creation. But that was primarily a governance type decision, because one of the funny things I wanted to try to say, or I think it's funny anyway, is that many times the director in that situation has unlimited downside and no upside as a co-op director. And nobody you do it sometimes, but those aren't the seats that you want to jump into, where a lot of things could go wrong, but there's probably not going to be a parade and, celebrating the board because everybody's got their opinions. So I think you touched on something really important. The co-op director seat, as I understand it, has more of that almost unlimited downside for anything that might go wrong or anybody that disagrees with any decision. But what's the upside?
The upside may be very time-bound.
Right.
Terms of service, right?
Right.
I do think so. Kind of dig in what you just mentioned there around some of
it's like control, right? I'm in there. I know what's going on. I get to voice my opinion. That's what it is. But on a relative basis, if something goes haywire, and let's just make up a case study where they go down the road of selling to us, and we pull out at the last minute, and they've told their customers about it, and the employees have learned about it. That's an example of where it could just really be a nightmare, and they're not taking a big salary. They're really not being paid like a corporate director.
Yep.
And they're subject to unlimited second guessing and Monday morning quarterbacking, but they all feel a great sense of duty to represent their neighbors and their grower colleagues.
Well, so I think there's an emotional aspect here. I mean, anyone transitioning out of an ownership position in a business, having any opportunity to take chips off the table, but somehow still have a voice at that table, that's an attractive proposition because it makes the decision non-binary. And so I understand why folks would want to explore that. But I do think and you all, I'm sure this played into your calculus, it creates some real structural problems, because if there are capital requirements in excess of what the existing, preliminary prospectus predicted, not all farmers by design are very liquid, right? It's a lot of those operations are run.
They're exactly on the wavelength of
they're run to generate almost no profit and reinvest back into the business and land acquisition and equipment, et cetera. I'm speaking in generalities here. But the problem then when the capital requirements suddenly increase because the opportunity is greater than expected or the risks are not what we expected, all it becomes now is dilutive to their equity position because they can't put more money in. And so then now you're still on the board.
Rate.
You're on the board.
Yes.
You feel like you're involved, but actually your exposure to that success is less and less over time. And that just never seems to work out very well. So
yeah, good for you. That's really well said. And let's go through the dilution concept for those that don't necessarily know what that means. So we've got a $10 million base and we need another 2. And some people decide not to put up their pro rata 20% for the next round. So their percentage interest goes down. But that calculation of how are we going to value the 2 that's coming in and how much dilution is going to be inflicted on those people that don't go along this time creates fiduciary exposure to everybody that's in the room. around the table that's blessing that calculation and the valuation of the new round. So those are exactly the things that I said to the growers. The probability of something like that happening in years 1 to 3 is high, and I don't want to put us or you through that. So this is cleaner. And if we get to a point a couple years down the road where everybody's happy and you guys want to get involved from an ownership stake, I'm happy to revisit that topic. I love the way our structure is now, but if we added icing on the cake to say, after 3 years or 5 years since we bought the company, X number of our growers invested in our venture because they believe in where we're going, I would love for that to be another layer of our story.
Absolutely. But Tim, I think what's coming through in this conversation, in addition to the passion for this business and business in general, is also your pretty diverse background. You know, you've been an operator, you've been a chief executive, including the position you're in now. You have been and are an investor. You're an experienced board member. And so bringing that all together for the benefit of this project, this investment, is particularly special. I do want to ask you one question as we bring this thing to the end here. You know, there's a lot of platitudes. This is going back to the governance versus operator kind of dichotomy. And you guys have a very different pre-existing relationships, which makes it both easier and harder for you depending on the context. But we hear a lot of platitudes across industry about, you know, there's tough board, there's a good board, right? That's a board that doesn't get along, they're not aligned, or that's a good board, and everyone defines a good board differently. Boards also talk about, you know, they have tough CEOs or good CEOs. They have CEOs who are open to feedback, or some that would just as soon manage their board as opposed to listen to them, et cetera. And so it's all interesting, but it's not additive to speak in platitudes. But the issue of tension among chief operators, and it's not exclusive to the CEO, it could be COO, CFO, anyone who's going into those boardrooms. There's these sources of tension that are negatively impactful to the business. And so in your experience, what are for our listeners here, what are the 1, 2, maybe 3 things that you always keep an eye out for, whether you're as a board member or a CEO, those signals of friction that, if uncorrected for, can manifest in some pretty nasty stuff that you would encourage people to watch out for? Because my position is you need to have a lot of mutual respect, a lot of candor, and a low cost of candor for those relationships to work. But I haven't had your suite of experiences. I'd just love to know kind of what you would encourage our listeners to watch out for, whether they're on a board for the first time or they're moving into a CEO seat where they've established their first fiduciary board, for example.
So make sure I don't forget to say this. Joe, I really like the way your mind works. And that's a great question. And you and I could talk for a long time. So the first business book that I read that stopped me in the tracks was The Value Added CFO by Gary Wilson, who was the CFO at Disney and became the CEO at Northwest Airlines and went on and on and on. And I was a young fledgling CFO at the time. And he said, if the head of sales and the head of finance aren't banging heads at least once a week, there's not enough creative tension in the organization. And I'm a very conflict avoidant person. So that's, as a 27, 28-year-old, it stopped me to say, not only is it okay for there to be tension,
there needs to be tension.
There needs to be. You're suboptimizing if there isn't. So that was very eye-opening for me. And it was long before books like Radical Candor. And I'm a grandpa, I'm a dad, and one of the dilemmas for me is I want to be a great business guy and deliver great results, but I also want the people that work for me to feel cared for and nurtured, and it's cheesy, but loved, in an objective professional definition of that. So I think when you sense that people are not saying what's really on their mind, and you have not created an environment like we do executive sessions, so my board can talk to me privately, so they're not like, I don't really want to say this in front of the whole team, or sometimes you're worried you're going to say something dumb, or you're not paying attention, or you're asking a dumb question. So I think the most common thing would be attack the elephant in the room. Don't tiptoe around it, and have the courage to say, what's really on your mind, Joe? I'm sensing in your body language, you're grinding your teeth. I can hear it. What's really going on, right? So I think the courage to, what you said it very well. I don't have your exact words, but have the courage, the humility, the commitment to go get that information, even if it's going to sting, even if it's not what you want to hear. So that would be number one. Number two, the lesson for me, and I made this mistake a couple times really badly in my career, that little voice inside that's going, watch out, this isn't right. So I've really worked hard to get quiet when that little voice is, I can hear it. And so make sure you're listening to that inner voice and be true to it. Because when we ignore that to be politically correct or not, I'll flip it and be a director, because I'm also a director in a couple companies where I'm kind of a tough director, because I've seen the benefit of and tough isn't the right word. I'm just courageous. I don't shy away from, I'm sorry, that does not make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Can we go through that one more time? Instead of just nodding. Like I have a guy that I'm on the board of, and so now we can't talk about it any more than this. I'm going out of school a little bit. But I said, if you want to assemble a board of bobblehead dolls, you could do it. You have a cool company and you're a cool guy. If you want that, me and the other gals that you've chosen are the wrong ones. So if you just want words of affirmation, that's your love language. You could build because they control the board. He controls the company. So I'm like, this is selective pain you've chosen to have us in here challenging you. This is up to you, but you're missing out if you've built this table full of operators and you're so insecure or defensive or whatever that you don't want to hear it. And so thirdly, and I've already said it, is our executive session, my directors, and we just had a meeting last Wednesday, each one of the three took me into a part of a room that I didn't know existed, looking at and listening to what they're hearing from me and my team and saying, what about this? Or what about that? And so have directors that are smarter than you, that have different experience than you, and have that sort of ability to project concepts in a way they say, Tim, I know you're in the weeds and I know you're grinding like crazy, but part of what I'm hearing is I think we've evolved over these 2 years, and maybe it's time to revisit this aspect of the way we set it up. And I was like,
yep,
bullseye. And so it gives them a sense that they're contributing to the enterprise value, the creation of enterprise value. And if you don't give them that chance, then it's just like a perfunctory reading of the minutes, 5 management updates, a refresher on the strategic plan, adjourned. These guys want to get in there and feel like they're making an impact. And so have directors that want to make an impact and aren't in it just for the check. So that, I don't know, that's some rambling, Joe, but those are the things that come to mind.
Those are good. And, I think a couple of things there. If you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I delivered a fair question in a fair way without undermining the credibility of the person, and they took it wrong, right? If you do it the right way and you get a bad response, that may be a personality profile or a culture fit. And I think if underlying it, in my days at Cargill, we always strove to have within the business unit I was in a low cost of candor. If you behaved in the right way,
I love that,
said the right thing, it shouldn't cost you politically or professionally. Now, that's not always universally true. That's an aspiration because emotions are involved. But I do think there's a lot there. I will say personally, I also had a GM when I was in grain operations that would come in and, it was a relatively small business, multi-locations, grain origination and distribution business in the Mid-South. And we would have I think it was Tuesday morning, a couple of hours, the whole leadership team would be together, accounting and finance, myself as operations, merchandising and trade, sales, and then the GM. And if me and merchandising were a little too chummy, someone wasn't doing their job. We figured out pretty early on, we got to kind of make sure we're at each other's throats a little bit and pushing each other, because if she's happy and I'm not, or if we're both happy, it means either she's not pushing the trade hard enough or I'm not defending the needs of the asset and grain quality and efficiency, et cetera. And so I think that healthy tension is something to strive for. Tim, I would love to potentially have you back and call it a year, 18 months to kind of see how things are going, revisit some of the stuff that we kind of just scratched the surface on here, dig into other topics. I think you have a wealth of knowledge. And I just want to say, as we close out, I just really appreciate you taking the time to spend it with us today.
Well, it was fun. I enjoyed it, and I would be honored to come back. So thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit with your audience about Farmer Direct Foods and where we're going. So please like and follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, a word from the marketing department, and check out our website, farmerdirectfoods.com. Click on Meet the Growers. You'll see some of our larger growers, and they really are the heart and soul of this business. So we like to say we take our business very seriously, but not ourselves. So we're on a mission, but we also want to have fun as we do it.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we get the links into the show notes. And I would encourage our listeners to check these guys out. You've seen it's a little bit different, a lot different in some respects, but some good stories and some good learning lessons there. So I want to say thanks again for being a part of the Pacesetter Pod, Tim, and to all of our listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. A quick reminder to also like and subscribe to the Pacesetter Pod wherever you get your podcasts. And please consider leaving us a review, as that's the single best way you can support the show and make sure we get this content out in front of the people who need it. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can connect with me, Joe Mosier, on LinkedIn. Or as always, you can set up a call by visiting us online at mosiercg.com. Thanks again for listening, and have a wonderful day.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.